Creativity and a learning mindset are essential to succeed. Learn how these innovators put these skills to use to become the best in their fields. Welcome to Innovators to Know, brought to you by IdeaMix.
Ciel is an experienced executive and leadership coach with 30 plus years of experience with leaders and teams across industries. She has a relatively rare combination of business, psychology, and coaching qualifications, and her passion is to support individuals and teams to feel good while doing good in the world. Laura, welcome to the IdeaMix podcast.
Thank you. When you say 30 years, I'm wow.
Well, if it's gone by quickly, this is a good thing.
It's more like, am I really that old?
I think, someone said this to me the other day, 45 is the new 30. And then you could just translate that right up the chain. Right, well, Laura, so feel good, do good, and profitably make a difference. This is one of the phrases that you've used with frequency. Is part of the reason that you do what you do and that you have this focus that the profit motive at companies and among teams, consequently, often simply takes over at the expense of other organizational values, team dynamics, individuals being cared for?
Right. And the truth is, it's a business. It needs to make money. I mean, that's it. If we talk too much, I think we can go too far the other direction, right? Yeah. It is important. It's a critical piece. And there's research now that shows that a lot of the aspects that maybe have been ignored for a while, having to do with the human component, actually are, they're starting to show how it is tied in to that profit, how it is tied into, let's say, sustainable growth or innovation or engagement of your team members. And that all connects back into how the company, serves its customers, and therefore how it brings in money and what that profit is, what those revenues are. So I think it's a and rather than one or the other. Yeah. It really is important to look at both. And I think people are starting to become aware that the human component is as critical as other aspects of the business.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a story that I happened to be discussing with a friend last night over dinner about a CEO in the healthcare industry, Roy Vagelos, who is now retired. But he was telling the story of how ivermectin was a medication that was discovered by their team of scientists at Merck when he was there. And the company sort of said, oh, this cures river blindness. Like, who cares about that? There's no market for that, right? So we don't need to publicize this drug or market it actively or do much with it. And the scientists protested and said, that absolutely is unacceptable because this is a disease that affects some portion of people, even though that might not be a profitable market segment. Mm-hmm. And they forced it to go to market. And they acted, in their capacity as a key stakeholder at the company. Of course, later on, this had a whole bunch of unintended consequences. It became, behind penicillin, the second most important drug in terms of impact on humanity, right? Because then it was applied to lots of other diseases, and it's been a key cure for a lot of different things. And I think it goes to this point of the stakeholder-based model that you, I think, spend a lot of time thinking about and focusing on, where companies and organizations and teams and individuals ultimately work best when there is alignment among the various voices and they're heard and listened to, and it isn't sort of a one-sided equation constantly.
And I love that word. Alignment is something that we use a lot in our work, and because there are a lot of different aspects of an organization where you can look for and you can fine tune that alignment. And when things, simply if things are not aligned, we're not accessing as much as we can, and that could show up in many different ways in an organization. But what the example that you gave is there was some alignment with the scientists around what they were doing and what their bigger picture impact was at the company, and they felt that it would be out of alignment not to say something and not to move this forward, push it forward. And I think there's such a great opportunity there for so many companies right now, especially because the world is changing so rapidly. We don't know what it's going to look like in 12 months. We don't even know what it's going to look like in 6 months. So the way I think about it is we have all this incredible energy available in a lot of different forms. And if we are scattered, we lose impact. When we are aligned, we really focus that impact. And I think that that's an opportunity right now for leaders and companies who are asking themselves, how can I show up in this really rapidly changing world and make a difference? And I'm talking about profit as well as people, right? Like that's, I think, and make a difference, have a positive impact in multiple ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. So one of the foundational ideas, Laura, underlying your 9Q methodology is that we talk a lot about problems and not enough about solutions. I think this is a problem that is afflicting most of our society at this point. It isn't merely limited to organizations or teams. We see it a lot in our business. Customers come seeking coaching because they don't just want to talk about the problem, right? They want to talk actively about solutions and have a roadmap and act on it and be held accountable. Tell me what made you come to this point of view.
Okay, well, it's a pet peeve of mine to focus only on the problem, because what that does is it, unfortunately, and let's just say fortunately at the same time, because look, I'm all about human behavior. That's just been my background, right? We actually do things that might seem kind of strange for us to do because we are gaining some value from it. So when I say fortunately, unfortunately, when we point to the problems, we are putting ourselves into a victim stance, a victim energy. And the fortunate part of that, we'll say, and in quotes, is then you're not responsible. It's someone else's fault. Someone else has done something, some group of people, an individual, a company, however, whoever it is that you feel has done this to you. And I say fortunate in quotes because there is a little like, I don't have to deal with it. It's that if that person or that group would change, then I'd be good, right? Yeah. But the unfortunate piece of that is, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, is you completely give up the ability to make any change yourself.
Yeah.
And that first of all, it doesn't feel good. It feels really bad.
It's massively disempowering in the end.
It's completely disempowering. Why should you don't need to look at your piece of it if it's someone else has made this happen, right? Yeah. So I am such a firm believer in this is where the empowerment. So our company's big purpose is empower people. That's big. But it's this idea of when people recognize that they do have the power over many different things, not everything. There are things external that we don't have control over. Then you start to get to look for the solutions. So then that's piece one. And then piece two is how, right? Yep. So I think it's first shifting that mindset from a victim mindset to really looking at what can I do? What is my piece of it? What kind of change, positive change can I drive forward? And then the second piece is how. How do I do that? So you might have someone who wants it, probably at your right? People, potential customers, they've made a little bit of that shift. They're wanting to know how do I move forward on this now that I've made this shift? There are a whole lot of people who are still stuck in that mindset of a victim place, and they're, moving forward isn't going to work until that there's an acknowledgement that there's something that they can have some control over something.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think we're almost at a really difficult societal point where this victimhood idea has taken root to the point where it is now the explanation for, just so many things that go on, whether it's individually or societally. And they really prevent us from focusing on what is the core problem and how do we get to a solution set for it, right? Because as you said, you just sort of hide behind, oh, these are circumstances beyond my control because somebody did this to me. And it's deeply, deeply unconstructive, if not destructive.
Yeah. And then, you add the piece, and this is something we talk a lot about, and I think it has really increased since the pandemic hit, and it's continuing, is when you are in more of a victim stance, there's usually some anger, frustration, and fear in that. And when there is fear, and we all know this intuitively, we might not put it into words, but when there is fear running through your body, you're actually physiologically, you're being cut off from the multiple solution solving component of your frontal cortex. And so that's the other piece, is if you're in this reactive fear-based state, you're already just physiologically you're not going to be able to access all the potential solutions, right? You lock into maybe one or two response sets that have been a part of you for a long time, and you lose access to. So that's another reason why for us, it's individually 100%, but it's also collectively. So if you're speaking within an organization, if you have a leadership team, which we have had before, where you have, let's say, post-merger, and you have someone who is in a very much of a fear state about the other people, right, from the other company, and very reactive and victim stance, the possibilities of what that leadership team and thus the organization can create they become so few. Yes. Right? Where if you can shift that, and if you can help everyone to align with the bigger picture, which, hopefully for most companies is what their bigger purpose is, why they're there, what they're doing, and shift that, I have some sense of empowerment around what this looks like going forward, then we have so many more potential solutions that we can assess moving forward.
100%. Do you think, Laura, that for many of us, I think back on my own experience, so this is, just bear with me for a second, it's a purely anecdotal point, right? But we all go through difficult moments and periods in our lives, some super traumatic even. And at some point, you almost confront this question. I certainly did at a point when I had been through a fairly traumatic thing of, am I going to be a victim, or am I going to emerge from this with strength? And it's almost like this kind of weird bimodal sort of outcome. And I think when you make a decision to try to solve the problem rather than kind of wallow in the problem itself, there's a muscle memory that develops around, okay, I see the problem, it sucks, but I'm going to begin to solution it. And I may or may not get that right, but I'm going to keep trying until I find a viable solution. How for people who fall into that victim mentality, do you help them develop that muscle memory around, hey, here's this different approach that actually is a lot more productive?
Yeah. I'll speak to individually first, because again, when you go collectively, if it's a leadership team or any team, you have all the different individual factors, right? So it's there's a certain amount of aligning within each individual before helping a team align. So you said something really interesting in your anecdote. You said you could see and you made a decision, right? You could see, am I going to stay in this or am I going to shift out of it? Not like that's step one. And it's quite challenging for some people to get to that point. Mm-hmm. So there's two. So based on what you said, I would say you've had some in your past, you've had some ability to take a challenging situation, take a step back and ask yourself, what am I going to do with this? Or how do I want to move forward? Right. So I know just based on that short piece that you have had some success or at least some practice in doing that. And not every, some people don't. So it's you at that point, you're starting to build on it. And it's a little bit easier if I were working with someone like that, then you can start to connect back to that past experience, right? This happened, therefore this happened. And it's not, for anyone listening, it's not like you make a shift and then everything works out perfectly.
Right. It's a constant work in process.
Yes. And I think, honestly think this is part of our life learning. I think that for me, when I was younger, I somehow had this weird illusion that if I did everything right, then everything would turn out all right. That is not true. Yeah. And, I think that's one of the things that age brings, that a different perspective of what we actually have. So going back, I was shocked at one point that I was doing everything right and it wasn't working. So I had to shift, those, we all have these different constructs that we've developed over our childhood, and that's from family and it's from school and it's from society. And each one of us has a different one based on who we are, based on the environment we grew up in, based on, where we grew up in the world, all these things. But we all have that ability to take a step back. For us, part of the training is to pause. It's really important to pause, because when you don't pause, you're in that reactive, you're in that firefighting. I got to take care of this. I got to take care of it. And then that can go on forever, the way the world is set up. Yes. So it's really helping people to trust themselves, that pausing for brief moments. And then we train our super basic level training for everyone has to do with some really simple habits that help you to pause. And this is all done pretty quickly. It's not like you have to go out and meditate for 10 hours, but to pause, to connect with you, and to connect with what's important to you, what matters, what are your values, what are you grateful for, just to reconnect with, and then to move forward from that state. Because if you're in more of a state of pause, I would say proactive, setting intentions and clarity around who you are and what matters to you, that's when that mindset starts to open up a little bit. You're like, oh, maybe I could do something differently. Maybe this could look, maybe I could change this. Maybe if I, and that's when those potential solutions start to open up. So a lot of our initial training is really about getting to that state of mind where you're not reacting and you're in touch with, again, and this doesn't have to be real woo-woo. It's just like, who am I in the sense of what matters to me, right? Yeah. Look, my mom died suddenly. This was one of those learning lessons for me 20 years ago. And one of the things one of the gifts that gave me was, I could die tomorrow. I could die tonight. Am I doing right now what really matters to me? And not everyone thinks that way, because we don't want to think about death. and I would say it's probably the freshness of that after 20 years is a little bit less, obviously. But there is that was a lasting gift that my mom in her death gave me, was we don't know how long we have. And if that's the case, if you can, any one person listening to this, if you can pause and just ask, what really matters to me? Meaning, what matters to me if this were my last day on planet Earth? It shifts the way you look at things. It really does. And you become way less reactive. You become much more grateful. And you realize it all. The other thing it does is it puts some of those really stupid, annoying things into perspective. The things that seem to really, I don't know, sometimes I have things in the back of my mind. I'm like, just stop. It's not a big deal. And for some reason, some part of me has latched onto it. But the more that we can let go of the things that really don't matter, then we're letting go of some of that stress and anxiety, which then opens up, again, possibilities. What might it look like going forward?
Totally. So, Laura, a really key element connected to reframing how we think, right? And taking time to think, as you've described, which is so critical, is the role that coaching and mentorship play in our lives. I think that many people have this misconception that somebody mentors you, like it falls into your lap, like some bolt out of the blue, and, oh, I found this amazing mentor and that was so great. But it actually takes an active seeking out of mentors at different times in your life. You have different mentors. Sometimes they are also your friends, and other times they might even be your partner, whatever it is. But it's a dynamic and shifting role that plays in our lives. And I suspect you have had strong coaches and mentors, as I have had. And the singularly most useful thing that I have found is they're, particularly in instances where they were disconnected from me, other than that I knew them, but there was no bias, in other words, in their view. It wasn't like a boss mentoring me, that there was great value to that very objective advice. And coaching, in a sense, is that same thing. It's this objective advice from a trusted third party, even though you don't know them super well, right? What is the role that's played for you?
So I feel like I have a little bit of an unusual journey in this area, in that I noticed at a very young age that the questions I was asking and the insights that I would share were pretty intense. And
how young were you?
Well, I mean, I remember being 4 and I was overtaken by a feeling that there was suffering in the world, and I felt like I needed to do something, and I couldn't put it into word. I couldn't put it into great words at the time, and all my I had amazing parents, but all they really knew is I never slept and I never stopped asking questions. So I was like, oh, okay, can we just take a break? But and I don't know. I don't know if this was a time period that I grew up, but being female and being very, very intense people kind of wanted me to, let's just say, play the game I was supposed to play. Okay. So periodically I'd have little glimpses of, in my mind, who I think of, what I think of especially when I was younger, mentors, brief mentors, that they probably don't even know the impact that they had. Right. And one of them was a high school teacher, and I thought I was failing the class, and it was a speech class, and I didn't love speaking. I was very, very shy, and we were doing a leadership practice thing in a small group, and I was listening to the other people in my group, and in my mind I'm thinking, we need to approach this differently, right? Like I had all these thoughts, but I had learned at this point, well, don't show up too big or too intense, because then people will just go, whoa. Yeah. And so I was listening, and a teacher stood by me, and he just said, okay, group, just remember, the leader is not always the most talkative person. Mm-hmm. Okay. I felt it in my bones. I was like, oh, almost like he knows I'm thinking about things. So super tiny example. And then as I got older, and look, I have my doctorate in psychology. We do a lot of our, we're encouraged to do a lot of our own exploration and therapy. And so lots of practice with a lot of different people. And one of the things that I learned is, and I want anyone listening who thinks that they might be too something to hear this, not everyone could work with me. And in fact, most people who I talked to felt, I can reflect now, they felt so challenged that they lost the ability to hold the safe space. And this is what I think as coaches and psychologists as well, like we're holding a safe space for people to do their work. We're not doing the work for them. And sometimes we might be directive, but we're not telling them everything. We're creating a really vibrant, safe space. And so to anyone out there who maybe hasn't done much in this area, because I doubted myself for a long time. I just said, well, no one understands me. I'm just going to have to do it myself. There was really this sense of I had to do it on my own. It took a while for me to go, oh no, I just need to keep looking for the right person, right? So there is a matching that's super important when you're seeking out. And I would say the same thing for, a mentor, anyone who you want to. And again, different if there's that personal relationship, like you mentioned, you don't have the same autonomy to, but if you're choosing someone who's doesn't have that other relationship with you, search, and you will know it inside, because you will know that you can show up 100% as you are without fearing that you're too much or too whatever, right?
No.
Too whatever it is. I mean, there are a lot of those too much. I think a lot of people have that sense that somehow, at some point in their life, they were too whatever it was, right? But you need to find the person who can be and create that really safe space. And the same thing is true when we work with leadership teams. We've got several high level, very bright, very, have their own opinions and their own experiences. And the goal is to create a safe space that team can co-create something even better than any one person could create on their own. And
that's the key. I think it's that 1 + 1 is 3, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it can only happen if each of us do our work.
Yes.
Right. There's the individual piece, there's the collective piece.
Totally. Laura, I want to take a quick look at a short video that you sent us about living in flow. Here we go.
What do we mean by flow state? Flow is when you feel great. Your energy is focused and intentional, and everything seems to move effortlessly. When you're in flow, you're fully engaged in highly productive and inspired action. It's the opposite of non-productive busy work. Think about a time you've been in flow. Remember how good it felt, and remember the results you experienced. This training will help you learn how to achieve this state more consistently, and more importantly, when you fall out of flow, you will learn how to quickly move back into this yummy space. The more you practice this training, the more empowered you will feel.
So why does this?
So could you quickly summarize the 9Q method, and particularly the terms flow, grow, and create for our listeners?
Sure. And we're playing around with this, the third one, the naming of it, to create, innovate. So, so flow, grow, create is really the basis of our method. So we see 9Q solutions as the how, right? So we've got all these problems in organizations, and we can identify a good chunk of them, but how are we going to move forward? And that's what we feel we answer that question. So the flow framework is the foundational piece, which I mentioned just a little bit earlier. This is about each person individually being able to get into their own state of flow. Yeah. And for anyone who hasn't heard that term, you know it intuitively. It's when you feel everything's lining up. You feel like what you do is done really efficiently and in less time than normal often. But there's a sense of, you feel free, you feel creative, you feel good, and that you're creating from that space. Again, back to multiple solutions, right? An open mindset and a curious mindset. So it's what the individual does to pause and get out of victim stance, pause and get out of a fear-based or reactive stance. It's what they do to set themselves up. And it's interesting because even with people who have trained for quite a period of time with us, we do some private executive coaching. A lot of our work is with organizations, teams, but even when they have gone through multiple levels of leadership training, we ask what has been most valuable. It's been this flow piece, because without it, the rest of it, you can't access the rest of it. You can learn it, right? Like you can learn the knowledge of it, but you can't really access it and integrate it in a powerful way. So I like to think of it as, this is how you get yourself set up to really, nail it. And when you get thrown off, which it's what the world does, it's going to happen. Sorry. Yeah. It's not like it's not like you check all the boxes and then you stay there, unfortunately. Yeah. But you can reboot, because one of our habits is reboot. So it's about recognizing. You could be in the middle of a meeting and get triggered by something, and you have the skills to be able to reboot and get back into that flow zone. So super critical and super simple, right? And it's the foundation of everything we do. The second framework is grow. And this is simply, if you think like big picture, we're all meant to evolve and to grow and to expand. That's something I feel really strongly. You can look at nature. It's always evolving. It's always expanding. There's always something new and fresh and different. Like the recent rains in California have been unbelievable. We have poppies, which is our state flower, beyond anything we've seen in years and years and years. So it doesn't stay the same. You think it stays the same, maybe, but it doesn't. And we're the same way. So the growth framework is really helping each person to look at all aspects of who they are. And in our training, we connect them with elements. So you've got the element of earth, and for us, that's connected to your physical quotient. All the things. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? How are you physically doing? Right? And are there opportunities to grow and expand in that area? And then we have IQ, which is beyond just IQ, your IQ. It's really that mental. It's the mental training. It's the knowledge. It's the, hey, are you learning how to use AI right now? Because it's going to be in our world, right? Yeah. It's like, what are the different aspects where I can stretch my mind, not partly for my role at work, but also partly for me. I love languages. So I'm on Duolingo learning a couple different languages because it stimulates my mind. It's not specific to work, but it stimulates my mind. I love it. And it gives me a different perspective. When you're learning another language, the way that you communicate is very different in that language than it is in my primary language. So I love that expansion. And then EQ, most people know about emotional intelligence. This is really, how's your relationship with yourself doing? How's your and then therefore, how are your relationships with, family, loved ones, colleagues, and nurturing and monitoring and really attending to that. And then and that's the fire elements, that connection. And I should mention the IQ is the water element. It's like research based. Scientific. It doesn't have a lot of emotions to it. It's just knowledge. And then after that fire element, that connection, that EQ, SQ, which we call either service quotient or spiritual quotient. So, just depending on what people are comfortable. But the idea is, this is how are we bringing who we are and our unique gifts out into the world.
Yeah.
In many different ways. And so, someone could be working really hard at building their IQ, but maybe they've neglected reaching out, how am I serving the world? That could be at work and could be outside of work. It doesn't matter. And then 9Q, which we call energetic intelligence. And this is in the void, and the void is kind of everything and nothing. Right. And so 9Q is about, it's much less tangible than the other elements, but it's about alignment. If you look at all your different quotients, how aligned are they? So that framework is all about looking at where have we been, what have we been neglecting, and where do we have opportunities to grow? And it's not a once and done either. It's an ongoing. And then the last framework is the create. I think we're now calling it innovate framework, which is you've got to have those other two in place, right? Yeah. And then the magic happens, because this is where you actually create, whether it's creating a new product, whether it's building a new business, whether it's developing a new relationship. It can be painting a painting, creating a song, anything. And it's not so much that we made it. It really is just what happens. And we just put words and a framework to it to make it so that you can leverage it. And so you're looking at each of those elements that I just went through, and you're looking at the flow of an innovative creative method, and you're going from imagining something to declaring what it looks like, to being clear that you have all the resources, the knowledge, the training to execute, to checking in and looking at why does it matter. That's the fire element. And then executing it, which is in the wind element. And that's like, let's go do it. And pulling back into the void and checking and see what's working, what isn't working, and what are we going to do going forward. And it's just a super fun, you can look at that as a year-long project. You can look at it in a very small, before a meeting or after a meeting, you can do it. So that's as brief as I can go.
Well, Laura, I'm smiling because I feel like in this conversation, we just closed the circle, and it's always wonderful when we do that, because everything you've described is in a sense the answer to where we started, which is that a framework like yours really empowers an individual, and then over time a team, or it can be applied in various settings, right? To take ownership of their own self-esteem, motivation, and confidence, and then hold themselves accountable for the fruit of their labors, right? Yeah. And if each individual unlocks their ability to do that, then you can see how it has such wide applicability across not just teams and organizations, but families, groups of friends, whatever it may be, right? Any kind of collective communal setting that we can think of. So it's fantastic. I have one last question for you before we wrap up. Particularly among young college and post-college young professionals, and we see this a lot in our business, that they are often struggling, even though on the outside all seems well, but they're often struggling on the inside with, I call them kind of the big three, which are stress, anxiety, and a lack of self-confidence. And there's this, we can, obviously there are lots of things we can do to dissect the reasons why there's this inconsistency between the external and the internal self. But it affects a lot of people these days. What would be your advice to individuals in those situations in terms of both the importance of reconciling that internal and external self, and how to do that?
Oh, there's a couple different layers on this. The first thing that I think of that I just feel compelled to say is this age group that you're talking about. I have such incredible compassion for them. It's not like I didn't have my hard times, but the world is changing so fast. They don't even know what to look forward to or what to set as goals, for the most part, because it's changing so fast. And I think it's just really fascinating. And I think of them as these incredible warriors for change. And they can be really again, this is generalization, but
Yeah.
as a whole can be really challenging for older generations because they're not going to tolerate what we have tolerated. So that's why I think of them as these warriors for change. And I believe that some of what many of them experience is there's a lot of inner turmoil because there's a lot of outer turmoil. And one of their, so this is my belief, I think one of their incredible opportunities that they have with all the gifts that they're bringing is the opportunity is to really get clear about who they are and what matters to them and be very proactive and very clear and proactive, because they're going to be, most likely, given what I see, most likely they're going to be asked, by the external events to more quickly change, more quickly make job changes, life changes, maybe even location changes than any other prior generation. That's what I believe. I don't know. I'm just saying, I think that they are coming in. They have a unique, as a general group, have a unique piece in this evolution that our planet is going through. And in order for them to be as impactful in a positive way, they really need to do the internal work, probably more so than anyone in my generation. So what I would say, two things. Wow, super courageous beings. And please, because we all know the records of substance abuse and suicide and all these other mental health issues that may not get to either one of those, but still negatively impact their lives. With all of that increasing, we have evidence that they are probably dealing with way more. Now, some of it is my generation didn't disclose it all, so maybe some of it is that. We don't know how much, but I believe it's happening a lot more. They need to start taking care of themselves and really ask what it is that they need.
Yeah, that's great advice.
And I don't know, it might mean doing something that maybe someone, society, or family doesn't understand. We can't figure it out for them. We can support their exploration, and we can support their decisions as parents, as elders in the community, and potentially as guides and coaches, right? But it's like they need to connect.
Their path to tread. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's a joy to talk big picture as well as, hey, what could be a path forward, right?
Yeah, totally. Wonderful.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe wherever you listen and leave us a review. Find your ideal coach at www.theideamix.com. Special thanks to our producer, Martin Maluski, and singer-songwriter Doug Allen.